What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Today, we're going to be learning AWS in under 2 hours. Now, AWS is a fantastic cloud platform to learn. There are so many companies that use it, and it's not going away anytime soon. And so in this video, we're gonna be covering a ton of different things. We're gonna be looking at S3 for S3 buckets. We'll be using Amazon Athena to query data out of your S3 buckets. We'll also be learning Glue and Glue DataBrew for some of that automation and ETL pipelines. And then lastly, we'll be taking a look at Quicksight for data visualization. These are some fantastic skills to know how to learn in AWS. And so if you're just getting started in AWS, you wanna learn a cloud platform, this is going to be the perfect video for you. So without further ado, let's jump onto my screen and get started. All right, so what we're going to be doing is creating an AWS account, looking at the UI within AWS, just getting familiar with it before we jump into some of the tools within AWS. Now here, I'll have this link down in the description. We are going to get started for free. So let's come right here. And what we want is the AWS free tier. With the free tier, we get a lot of things within AWS completely for free. Of course, there are some things that are not underneath the umbrella of the free tier, and so we won't be using those, but we will be able to do everything in this series with just the free account. So let's go ahead and create our free account. We need to sign up for AWS. Let's go ahead and verify this email address. So I'm going to use my Alex the Analyst YT at gmail.com. And my account name is going to be Alex the Analyst. We'll do AWS. I got the code. I'm going to put it in here and verify this. Now we need to select our password. So I'm going to put my password in right here. There we go. Let's go ahead and click continue. Now within this free tier, we get a few different things. One, the free services that are within AWS, they're never going to expire. You'll get them free always, which is really great. We also get 12 months free for certain services, and we'll look at that in just a little bit. And these things activate from when our trial actually starts. So let's go ahead and fill out all of this information, and then we will continue. Now, if we do use any services, we have to have billing on hand in case we use something that is not free or we go above the free tier. And so you have to input some type of credit or debit card number just in case you do that. Within what we're doing, we shouldn't be doing that, or if we do, it'll cost like 10 cents. And so it should be super, super cheap. So go ahead and fill in your information here. Next, we need to confirm our identity. I'm going to have it send me a text message so that I can fill this out. So go ahead and do that as well. All right, we're going to go ahead and select continue. And now we need to sign up for a support plan. Now we're using a free account, so we don't really need support. Now, if you are you're feeling wild and you want to get something like developer support, you can if you're encountering issues, or if you're using AWS for business, maybe you want business support. You know what? Go for it. I'm not going to stop you, but we're going to be using the free support because I don't want to pay for it. So let's go ahead and complete our sign up. And just like that, we have created our AWS account. Let's go to the AWS Management Console. Now we are actually going to sign in with our account. Now we are a root user, so we're going to come in here. We're going to put in our email address and sign in. All right, we are all signed in. Let's go ahead and click next. Done and done and done, and get rid of all this stuff. Now this is our console home. You'll notice that it's very, very blank. We don't have anything that we've recently visited. We don't have any applications running. We don't have any cost going either. And so once we actually start using some of these services, when we get into Glue and start automating things, you might have a cost, but it should be under the free tier, but you will have a cost. When we start using databases and instances and all these different things, these things are compute and resources that AWS offers. And so we'll be able to see and monitor a lot of those things within this home console right here. You can also customize this console home if you want to. So if you want to come in here and add widgets, you can add different metrics or different things that you want in here. But we're not going to be doing that in this lesson. So let's take a look at this UI really quick. On this left-hand side, we have services. If we come here, this is all the services that AWS offers. And I'm just going to kind of slowly scroll down. We have compute, containers, storage, databases, machine learning. Keep going down a little bit. We have analytics. For this series, we're going to be focusing on things in this analytics tab. So right in here, we're also going to be looking at some stuff in the databases. And then of course, S3 for S3 buckets. And so this is where you can access all the resources and all the services within AWS. Another thing to note is this right up here, which is our region. Now, I'm in US East, but make sure you have the appropriate one that you're using. The region actually is pretty important. If you choose one that's really far away, so you're going to have some latency and some delays on retrieving data or using different services. And so make sure this is the correct one for you. Lastly, if we come over here, you can notice in your account, we have account, organization, service quotas, billing and cost management, and security credentials. The two that I think are really important is account and billing and cost management. If we go over to billing, this is an actual service within AWS. You can look at all of your costs. And so as you start using these different services, you're going to want to come in here and make sure you're not, spending too much money. Just as an example, we use AWS for Analyst Builder. And so in here, we track all of our costs, all of our bills, everything associated with AWS for our platform. And so in here, we track a lot of stuff and we have different metrics and different flags that we have in case we go over a certain amount or if something isn't working. And so we monitor, you can create monitoring stuff. You can monitor a lot of stuff in this billing and cost management home, which also was really important when I was a manager and we were using AWS. And then lastly, of course, we have our account. Within here, there's a ton of stuff like bills, payments, if you want to change your credit card and all these different things. So this is a really good place to come and just be familiar with. So let's just go back to the services real quick while we close out, and we'll go to all services and view all services. So this is what we're going to be focusing on in the next several lessons. We're going to be looking at things like S3 storage. Let's come down here. I think we're going to be looking at Athena, AWS Glue DataBrew, AWS Glue, and a few others as well. So we're going to be in here. We're going to be learning a ton of stuff about AWS. And hopefully by the end of the series, you'll be really familiar with AWS. You feel really confident putting it on your resume and actually knowing how to use it. Now, S3 buckets are super flexible ways of storing your data within AWS, and they kind of connect to all the other data aspects of AWS as well. So if you have data sitting in an S3 bucket, you can connect it to a SQL database, you can connect it to a data visualization tool or an ETL tool or a ton of other things. So we're going to be diving into how to set up your S3 bucket, how you can actually use it. We're going to upload some data, and we'll talk about little tips and little nuances of using S3 buckets that I've learned over the years. So with that being said, let's jump onto my screen and take a look. All right, so let's get started by coming into our services. We're going to go down to storage, and we're going to click on S3. Now you'll notice we have S3 Glacier over here, and I'll briefly mention this a little bit in this video because it is worth noting. But let's come over here to S3. So this is kind of the homepage for Amazon S3. We'll take a look at a few things in here really quickly. They do have this little video here, which if you're just using S3, you should look at. Now you may be wondering, what does S3 stand for? It stands for Simple Storage Service. It's meant to be a really simple way to store just about anything in the cloud. You can store essentially any type of file, whether it's structured, semi-structured, unstructured, it could be almost anything. And so let's take a look at some of the things in here. It says store and retrieve any amount of data from anywhere. Amazon S3 is an object storage service that offers industry-leading scalability, data availability, security, and performance. Let's come down here and take a look at some of the benefits and features. You can read through all of these things, and they're all really good. I'll read through this one in a little bit, but it says data performance and durability, security, compliance, and auditing, granular data control, and flexible storage options. So right down here, it says save cost without sacrificing performance. Store data across a wide range of cost-effective storage classes and support different data access levels that are all designed for specific use cases. Now in this lesson, we're going to be taking a look at some of this, which is their storage classes, because these are quite important and they do affect the cost that it's going to take in order to store your data because it's not free. Storing your data in the cloud is not free. You can also look at some of their use cases as well as some of their case studies if you would like. Now, let's actually get into it. We're going to come in here and we're going to create our very first S3 bucket. So click on Create Bucket. The first thing that we need to do is do some of our general configuration. We're going to keep this a general purpose and we need to give it a name. So I'm just going to call this one Alex the Analyst Bucket. And if we had a pre-existing bucket, we've already configured it with different configurations, we can just select that bucket and it'll copy over all of the things that we want. The next thing we need to do is we need to come right down here. for object ownership. You can have ACLs disabled or ACLs enabled. If we go with the recommended route, it means that all the objects in this bucket are owned by this account, your account that you created. But if you do it where it's enabled, it says objects in this bucket can be owned by other AWS accounts. So with this one, it's just a little bit more secure because you're not saying other people can own it, which means they can delete it or change it in any way. Next, we're going to come down here to block public access for this bucket. Now, this part is actually very interesting because I've had a lot of use cases where you just want to block all public access. But if you start really getting into AWS and you start using a bunch of different tools and things, sometimes you need to get rid of it. And you need to come in, and not only that, there's much more advanced things in order to grant different bucket policies or create different bucket policies. And we most likely won't get into all that in this lesson, but it can get quite advanced. And so this piece is pretty deceivingly simple, but we're just going to keep it as we block all public access. But as you start opening it up to different services within AWS, you may want to turn this off so that you can have different services hitting off of your S3 bucket or the data within your S3 bucket. So we're just going to keep this as all public access off. I'm just giving you lots of extra information while we're in here, some of my thoughts. Next, we're going to do bucket versioning. We don't need to have any type of versioning or version control within our bucket. What this means is keeping multiple variants of an object in the same bucket. It's used to preserve, retrieve, and restore every version of every object stored in your S3 bucket. And that is, of course, going to cost a little bit extra, so we don't need that at all. Next, you can add tags, and tags are helpful if you have a lot of different buckets and maybe it's per client. You have some type of tag for a specific client. Perfectly normal. Next, we have default encryption. Now, encryption in general is really interesting within the cloud. I've run into lots of use cases where it's been really difficult to work with. If you want to pull data into certain services, you have to decrypt it because you've encrypted it in one area. And so if it's in the S3 bucket and it's encrypted, especially with kind of more advanced options, it can be somewhat difficult. And so just something to take into consideration if you want to kind of up your encryption. But for most use cases, you're just going to use the server-side encryption with Amazon S3 managed keys, with the bucket key enabled. Next, let's come down here to advanced settings. There's only one thing in here that we need to look at, which is the object lock. And remember, everything that you put inside of an S3 bucket is an object. Now, if we just read this right here, it says storage objects use a write once, read many, which is a worm model. And this helps prevent objects from being deleted or overwritten for a fixed amount of time or indefinitely. So if you want to drop a file in there and you know you're going to need it, you don't want it to be deleted for any amount of time, you can lock that and you can have an object lock on that object. It can never be deleted. We, of course, do not need that, so we're going to keep that disabled. And now we're ready to create our very first bucket. I clicked on create bucket. Looks like we can't use uppercase, and I actually knew that. Let's fix this. Now, this does have to be unique. This is global. So it says right here, you have to use a unique name. You can't just use like Alex. Someone's probably already chosen that. Let's go ahead and create our bucket. And now you can see right in here, we have our very first bucket. Very exciting. Let's click into our first bucket, our only bucket. Let's go ahead and click into here. And we have a few different things in here. We have our objects, and that's going to be any files that we upload into this bucket. And within this, we can create tons of folders and subfolders and subfolders and all these different things. We also have properties. So this gives you a little bit of information on how you actually created this. You have permissions, so if you want to grant access to it. I talked a little bit about this, which is a bucket policy. So if we turn off this all public access and we turn on this, or we allow this bucket policy, we can create our own bucket policy, and that's written in JSON. And we can create our own bucket policy for public access to this specific bucket. That gets a little bit more advanced, but it is really fun. I've done that quite a bit. You have metrics on this bucket. You can manage this bucket, and you can create access points to this bucket. So there's a lot of things just within a single S3 bucket that you can do. But the most popular one that you're going to be using is this one right here, which is just adding, creating, and deleting and using objects in general. So let's go ahead and upload our very first file. We're going to go over here to add files, but you could add a folder if you have a whole folder, but we're just going to add one file. And within my sample files here, we have a bunch of very real healthcare data. It's not real. It's just completely fake data. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to upload one, then we're going to come back and we're going to upload another one in a different way. And I'm going to demonstrate that and explain that in a little bit. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to select this file. We're going to open this up. And now we have this real healthcare data 1.csv, and that's what we're going to be uploading. Now let's come down here. We have our destination. This is telling us where we're actually placing this. We have our permissions, and of course we have bucket enforced. And so if we wanted to grant access to other accounts, we would need to change some of our access policies. But lastly, we have properties. And this piece is really interesting. This is our storage class. This is how Amazon S3 is actually going to store your data. Now, I highly recommend going in to learn more and looking at their Amazon S3 pricing, because it's very fascinating how they do this. And it's also really important that you understand the differences between these different options that we have. By default, we have standard, and it's designed for frequently accessed data within milliseconds for access. So if you're going to be using this data, you're going to be hitting off of it for different applications, services, visualizations, whatever you're using it for, you're going to want to be able to access that pretty quickly. And so this is a great option. If you need it even faster, you have S3 Express One Zone, which is single-digit millisecond response times for the most frequent access data. Now, I don't think it talks about cost in here, but you can use a calculator, and this is going to be costly, right? It's going to cost more to get faster and lower latency responses to your data. Now, if we come down here, you'll notice we have this Glacier tier. Now, if we went back to our resources, remember we talked about S3 Glacier, I was going to mention that. Well, you can use these different glaciers, which allows you to store it for long periods of time at a much lower cost, but it stores it a little bit differently. This one specifically is instant retrieval. It's very similar to almost standard, but you're kind of storing it for a long, long time. You may not need it for 10 years, but when you do need it, you need it right away, which is not a lot of use cases if you're using Glacier. But then you have something like Glacier Deep Archive. This is long-lived archive data access less than once a year with retrieval of hours. And so this is going to be data that you don't need it right away. You just want to be able to store it and have the security of putting it in the cloud. But you may not use that for years. And when you do need it, you're okay with waiting a little bit. It's going to cost almost nothing to store. It's very, very, very little. And oftentimes, if you're doing something like this, you may even put backups of databases. You may put backups of entire code bases in here, things that you may never use again. And there's lots of different use cases as well. So I just wanted to walk through that. With this file, we're going to do standard. And on the next file we're going to do Glacier Deep Archive and just look at the difference here. Now let's come down. We don't need encryption. We don't need any type of checksums, tags, or metadata. That stuff is almost never used or very, very infrequently. So we've uploaded this file. Let's go ahead and go to our destination. You can see that now we have an object in our bucket, which is fantastic. You can even come over here and you can see the storage class is standard. Now let's go in. We're going to upload one more, but now we're going to upload it as a different storage class. So let's go to upload. Let's go to add files. Let's go to healthcare data 2. We're going to open that up. The only thing we're going to change is now we're going to go down to the deep archive, and we're going to go ahead and upload this. Easy peasy. And there we have two files. Now we have one in standard, one in Glacier Deep Archive. Let's go into the first one. If we want to use this in any way, it's almost instantly retrievable. We can download this. We have a bunch of object options. So we can download it. We can copy it. We can move it. We can change the storage class. We can do a bunch of different things. But let's come back and we're going to go to that file 2. Let's go ahead in here. Notice right here, we're getting a totally different message. It says the object is stored in Glacier Deep Archive storage class. In order to access it, you must first restore it. So you have to initiate a restore right over here, and it can take 30 minutes to several hours. Notice we cannot download this. We also can't really do anything with it until we actually initiate that restore, and it is restored for us to be able to access it. And so that's just something that I think is worth noting about storing things in S3. There are different storage classes depending on your use case and what you're using that data for. And of course, you should look at the S3 pricing for both of these, because this one is going to cost more than this one. Now, there are costs associated with restoring it, but if you're restoring it once per year or maybe once every 5 years, it's going to be significantly less than your standard storage class. Now, this is kind of the meat and potatoes of using S3. Of course, you can create folders and subfolders. And in fact, when we get into some other lessons, especially things like glue, having folders, subfolders, and different things like that is actually really important because we have something called a glue crawler, and it'll crawl through your folders and subfolders and retrieve certain data. And so having a folder structure actually becomes more important in those lessons, but we'll of course get to that when we actually start looking at it. One other thing to mention, and this is just kind of a neat addition that they have in here. If we go into this file, we go down to query with S3 select, you can access this data and take a look at it. And so let's say we have our CSV here, it's comma separated. We can query this data using SQL. And so let's just run this with the limit 5 on there. We'll run our SQL query. We have our query results right down here. We can have it formatted and it looks like a little table. So we can come in here and we can look at this data down here and just see what's in there. And so that might be useful to you. Now, in the next lesson that we're going to be having, we're going to use Amazon Athena, which is basically a tool to query off of S3 buckets. That's its primary use. And so most of the time, I honestly am not using this almost ever, but you can even see right here, it says Amazon Athena. That's what we're going to be looking at in the next lesson. We'll be seeing how Amazon Athena works, how you can query data, kind of set up a pseudo database-like structure. I'll talk about the pros and cons of Amazon Athena versus other tools, because Amazon Athena is not for every use case. Now, Athena is a tool that allows you to query data in your S3 bucket without having to put that data into some type of database. You're just querying it directly. So let's say you just got a big file from a client, you put it in an S3 bucket, but you don't want to actually create a table and take the time to do all that whole process. You just want to take a look at the data. You just want to query it really quickly. Well, Athena allows you to do that. And so if that's the case, it can save you a lot of time and money. And so this is a really great tool that a lot of companies use. We'll talk a lot more about Athena in just a second. So let's jump onto my screen and take a look. All right, so let's come into services and we're gonna go all the way down to the analytics tab and we're gonna go into Athena. Now, before we jump into actually querying data and setting everything up, let's take a look at some of the information that they have on Amazon Athena. This right here, the start querying data instantly, is probably one of the biggest pieces of why you would use Amazon Athena. And I'll talk a little bit about a little later on about who this is for, why you would want to use this versus other tools within AWS. But Amazon Athena is an interactive query service that makes it easy to analyze data in Amazon S3 and other federated data sources using standard SQL. So primarily though, for you and I, most likely you're going to be using this just to hit off of an Amazon S3 bucket. You can even see how it works right down here. It says point to your data source. You're going to use Amazon Athena. You're going to query it, and you can analyze those results. Down here in the benefits that are right here, you have start querying now. It's powerful, cost-effective, fast. All of these things are great. Honestly, powerful, cost-effective, and fast could be a ton of different tools in AWS, but this piece right here is quite unique to it in the fact that you can query it as it just sits in an S3. You don't have to bring that data over into a database and actually store it in the database. You can keep it in your S3 bucket and still query off of it. And so that is kind of the real use case and the real reason why you would want Amazon Athena, just to look at data within an S3 bucket. Now, we do have two options here: query your data with Trino SQL or analyze your data using PySpark and Spark SQL. We are just going to be looking at the Trino SQL in this lesson, but of course you can use PySpark and Spark SQL as well. Let's go ahead and launch our query editor. And this is what you should see. Now it says we need to edit some of our settings, and I'll explain that in just a little bit. But over here on the left-hand side, we have our data. So we have our data source, we have our database, we have tables and views, and then we have where we query our data, and then down here where our results will be. So there's a lot of stuff just in here, but this is not super crazy advanced. If you've used anything like MySQL, or if you've used Microsoft SQL Server or anything like that, this is like a really, I don't want to say dumbed down version. That's not super kind to say, but it's a really simplified version of it. It's not very difficult to understand. You can also save your queries in recent and saved queries. Then of course we have some settings over here. Now we're going to see how we can set up our database, create a table or two, see how all that works with actually hitting off of data within our S3 bucket. And we will have to fix this piece, which is you have to set up a query result location in Amazon S3. That's for your results or your metadata. And that piece becomes quite important later on. So let's come down here. We have our data source. It's going to be our AWS data catalog. Now, we haven't covered this in a previous lesson, but you have something called a data catalog. And we're going to look a lot at that actually in either the next lesson or the lesson after that when we look at AWS Glue and Glue DataBrew. But that's how they kind of organize it. And so we're not going to be messing with that here, but we have to choose a database. And notice we don't have any database. So what we need to do is we need to start pulling in data. And when we're pulling in that data, we'll be able to create a database. Now, right here, we have create. You can create a table from a data source or create with SQL. So if you want to go the old fashioned way where you're creating a table like this, and you can specify the column types or data types, the location, all these things, you can do that. But we're not going to be doing that. We are going to be doing it with S3 bucket data. Now, we also have AWS Glue Crawler. Now, I'm just going to open this up really quick. We will be doing this when we get to Glue, when we start looking at Glue, because crawlers are great. Crawlers allow you to specify the data source, and it pulls it in and infers based off of the column names and the data types that are in there. It builds the table for you, and it's very helpful, and it kind of helps automate it as well. We're not going to be doing that. You can look at crawlers here, but we're not going to be doing that in this lesson. So this is what crawlers are, and that's within AWS Glue, but we're not going to be looking at that in this lesson. So what we are going to be doing is just creating it from an S3 bucket data. Now we need to call this table something. So let's call this healthcare, and I need to spell health right, healthcare data. I'm having trouble spelling. Let's go down to the database configuration. Now we don't have a database, so we need to create a database. And this is super easy. This is actually the table name. Let's call this patient data, because I want to call the database healthcare data. So I'll call this one healthcare data. I spelled that much better that time. So we've specified, here's what our table is going to be called. Here's what our database is going to be called. Now we need to specify our data set. And this is a kind of an odd part, and you'll see that in just a little bit. Let's come in here, and we have our Alex the Analyst bucket. Let's go ahead and click into it. Notice though, within this bucket, we have two data sets. I really only want this one, if I'm being honest. I just want this one, but you can't do that, not within Athena and within other parts of AWS as well. This is just a kind of one of those nuances within it. We have to specify a file path, not a file itself. So we have to choose the entire folder. Let's choose this. Let's come down here to the data format. Now this data format that's in here is a CSV. So we're going to come in here with an Apache Hive, and we're going to specify that is a CSV file. Of course, we want the delimiter, which is right down here, to be a comma. So we should be good to go. But because we're not using a crawler, we have to manually enter these column details. So I'm going to come down here. We are going to pull up this file. Let's zoom in a little bit. These are everything that we have. Now, there is an option in here, actually. We can copy all of this, and we'll come in here to add bulk columns, and you can do it like this, and then you can put in the data type. And that's perfectly fine if you want to do that. But we're not going to be doing that. I'm going to actually pull this up. We will bring this over to the side right here. And there we go. So now we can see it. So we have our first column. It's going to be patient _ ID. It doesn't have to be the exact same as over here in the file. Now this file type is just numeric. So we can come in here and we'll choose integer right here. And that's all we need to specify. Now we have several other columns. So let's just kind of bulk place them in here. We have name, we have age, we have diagnosis, and we have treatment. Let's see if there's anything else in here. I think we have files. Yeah, one more. So let's add in files. And just to show you, we can do name _ is this their full name? Yeah, full name. So we'll do full _ name. And we're doing that just to demonstrate that it doesn't have to copy this exactly. But for the full name, this should be string or text. So we could use char, we could use string. Let's see if there's any other ones that we could use. Probably those two. We'll call this one string. For age, it should be integer as well. For diagnosis, treatment, those are both string. So we'll do string and string. And then for files, this one is integer as well. Now we can make this a little bit larger. Now, there's a bunch of different things that we can specify, different types of compression if you have compression. So if you're using a zip file or anything like that, you can specify that it's sitting in it. There is partitioning as well. And this is a little bit more advanced. This is a way that you can group specific information together. But this is not something that we need to worry about, especially with our simple data set. There also is bucketing. This is a way to bucket multiple columns together, and then it's stored in a way that when you try to retrieve it, it's retrieved a lot faster and easier. Again, this is a bit more complicated and a little bit advanced, so we're not going to be taking a look at that at the moment. Let's go ahead and create this table. Now we're getting this error that says no output location provided. An output location is required either through the work group result configuration setting or as an API input. So let's go fix this really quickly. We're going to actually, I don't want to have to redo all this. So let's actually duplicate this. Let's go into our query editor and we need to go into this work group. So let's come over here. Let's go into our work groups. And this is our primary work group. Let's come in here and we need to come over to edit. Now within this, we had chosen Athena SQL. And if we come down, we have this query result configuration. We have to specify this so that our output and our metadata is put somewhere. So let's go ahead and browse this. Now, just like when we chose our file, we cannot specify like a file to put it in. We have to specify a file path. Now we're going to specify that this is our path, but this is not the best way to do it. I'm doing this for demonstration purposes only. We'll go back and do it the right way in a little bit. So this is where we're going to put our output, our results, metadata, all that stuff. Let's go ahead and choose this. And you can add lifecycle configuration as well as assign a bucket owner and some encryption, but we don't need to do that. Let's save these changes and let's go back. And let's go and create this table. So it created this for us. The query was successful. Let's refresh this. And it's giving us a default database. That's actually not the one that we put it in. We put it into healthcare. So let's go over to healthcare. And there is our patient data. You can see we have patient ID, full name, age, diagnosis, treatment, files with the associated data types. And what we can do, is we can come right over here. And let's say we want to preview this table. So that is completed. Let's go down here. And the data looks pretty good. We have this one file because we have two files. It's reading in that second file column names, but we have some data in there. And that's really, really good. Now we're limiting this to 10 and let's get rid of this. But actually, before we do that, I'm going to keep it the same because before we do that, we need to go look at the ramifications of what we actually did. Because unfortunately, it's not a good thing what we did. Let's go to our S3 bucket and let's see what data is in this Alex the Analyst bucket here. Now you can see we have a bunch of stuff. It's not just our two files anymore. Now we have a text file, metadata, CSV. This is our output and some extra stuff as well as the metadata. And what's going to happen if we come over here and we try to query all of our data? Let's go ahead and run this. Now you'll notice that we're pulling in a lot of bad data. This has completely ruined our query, and this has kind of defeated the purpose of setting up or using Amazon Athena. What we need is we need a separate folder location within our S3 bucket to dump all this stuff. Otherwise, you'll notice it's just going to keep growing. We're just going to have more metadata, more CSV, more text files. That is not a good thing. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a folder. We're going to call this one metadata healthcare. I think I spelled that right. And we're going to create this folder. Now I'm going to take all of these things and I'm going to delete them. So let's go ahead and delete all these files. And we have to specify this. I'm going to do a little cheat. I'm going to copy and paste this. There we go. Let's delete our objects. And those were deleted. And now you can see we just have our real healthcare data here, and we have our metadata healthcare up here. Now, what we need to do is we have to go back. We're going to go over to our work group, and we're going to specify the new metadata folder that we're going to be placing this in. So let's go back down to settings. Actually, it's in the query result configuration. Let's go to browse. We're going to go in here, and we're going to specify the metadata healthcare folder. So let's go ahead and specify that. Let's save our changes, and we'll go back to our query editor. Now, when we run this, let's go ahead and run this again. Now we have our output. Our data's in there. Well, let's come up here. Let's refresh this. The data's not in here anymore. Now it's in this metadata healthcare, and that's great, right? Well, let's come back here and let's run this once again. Let's come down, and you're going to notice something peculiar is what I'll call it. What's peculiar is the fact that now we have the same metadata. Now, why is this? Why is this happening, and why am I showing you this in the first place? It's because when you are specifying a file path, you are not only specifying a file path, you're specifying the folders and the subfolders. So when we come in here and we look at this bucket, if we just specify that we're pulling all the data out of this bucket, then we're pulling not just this data, we're pulling a folder within a subfolder. And so now we're pulling this data as well. So we need to, if we want to keep it all in one bucket, which we can, we need to create a new folder called our patient_data. So we're going to click on our file. We're going to click move, and we need to specify our destination. So we're just going to put this in the patient data. So let's go ahead and choose this, and let's move it. And we're going to close this out. Now, you'll notice that this data is a Glacier Deep archive. So we cannot move this, and we cannot query it. And that's also something that I wanted to mention while we were here. I somewhat forgot this. The data that we are pulling in, this data down here is only from one file. We don't have two files of data in here. The only data that we have, or that we were pulling in, was from this Real Healthcare Data 1. We were able to hit off of that data because the storage class is standard. But because when we set this up, this was a Glacier Deep archive, we cannot query off of that data. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to come back up here to patient data. I'm going to go to upload. So we have more than one file in here. Let's go ahead and add a file. I'm going to specify this number 2, but now we're just going to keep it as is. We're not going to, if we go down to properties, we're just going to keep it as standard. So let's go ahead and upload this. There we go. Let's close this out. Now the data that we're hitting off of is right here. So we're not hitting off of this file path. Now we're going to be hitting off of this patient data. So let's go back. What we need to do now is we need to come back up here, and we need to create a new table. So this new one, we're going to do create a new table. This is going to be patient data 2. And we're going to choose our healthcare data. Now our data set is going to be different. So we're going to go into the Analyst bucket, but now we're going to specify patient data. Now this is important because there are no folders and subfolders underneath patient data. It's just this one folder with our 2 files in it. When we actually run this and we query off of this data, it's going to go, all the metadata is going to go into here, but will not mess up our data source. And that is very important to understand. Now, oftentimes, just as, a little bit of side note, oftentimes when you're working with this, you can either set it up like this, or sometimes people and departments will create entire separate buckets just for their metadata. So they can store all their metadata in it. And then they just delete it or whatever. So let's go back here. We're going to recreate this. We're going to go to Apache Hive, and we'll do CSV. Note, if you do Iceberg or Delta Lake or Lake Formation Governed Table, these ones don't have options for a CSV anyways. So that's why we're not looking at it. But for Apache Hive, they do have our CSV option, which is common to limited. Now we need to go through and we need to specify our columns again. I'm going to skip this because you can just do this yourself, but we're just going to do this and then we're going to create our table. All right, let's go down. We're going to go ahead and create this table. Query was successful. Let's go back to our healthcare data and let's refresh this. So now we have our patient data 2. Let's go ahead and preview this table. And this is looking good. Let's get rid of this limiter. Let's come over here. Let's run this. Now you notice we have 42 results, which is because we have 1 right here. This is from file, it's actually file 2, and this is file 1, but I got that wrong. But we have both files in here that we're hitting off of. So within our S3 bucket, we have 2 files of exact data, and it's creating a union between these. It's reading in both of these files, and it's giving us our output. And of course, we have this right here, which we don't want. So we can always filter that out. Let's come up here. Let's say where, let's do patient underscore ID. There we go. We'll do is not null. And we'll run this. And now this looks really good. And so now we're querying off of our data and we're not getting any of that metadata issues that we were experiencing. We come back here in our metadata, it's storing all of this. And most of this is going to be pretty useless to most people. And so oftentimes you'll have some type of event or something in place to delete this because you don't want to store this long term, or most people won't. There may be some use cases too, but most of the time you're going to get rid of this. And so this is Amazon Athena. Now, you can also create views. If you want to tie a bunch of tables together and create a view, you can do that. And of course, this is SQL. So you can write, SQL statements like you normally would with any SQL environment or SQL editor. And so if we want to filter, if we want to join, we can do a lot of those things. And so this is a fully functioning query editor. Now, if we come down, there are some other things that we have. We can copy this data. We can download these results. We can clear this whole thing. We can also create a table from this query or a view from this query, which is really useful. We can also come up here if we want to save one of our queries. We'll come over here to query 5, and we're going to save as, and we'll call this one filter on nulls. It's a terrible description. We're just going to save that. So we have this filter on nulls. And if we ever want to reference this again, we can come back here and we can pull up this query and we'll have it available. Now, if we come over here on this left-hand side, you'll notice we have a notebook editor and a notebook explorer. So there are options to create notebooks and run notebooks as well. That's something I would create a whole nother lesson on because it's not as straightforward as using the SQL option. But another thing we can do, which is within jobs right here, is we have something called workflows. Now, workflows are how you can create different pipelines and different orchestrations with your data and with a bunch of different tools within AWS. This is definitely a little bit more advanced and not something that most people are going to use within Athena. For a lot of orchestration, data flows, data pipelines, you're going to be using Glue. And so within Glue, we'll be taking a look at how we can, set everything like this up. But you can come in here and you can take a look at a bunch of different ones. You can, these are different options. You can execute multiple queries, query large data sets, keep data up to date. And you can come in here and there's lots of different things that you can do. But again, we're not going to be covering it, but go ahead and take a look and see if you want to try it out. It can get a little bit complicated, a little bit complex. These are things that people do all the time in AWS, especially people like data engineers, database developers, analytics engineers, people like that. And so when we get to Glue, we'll look at how to create different workflows, data pipelines, and all that stuff. So with all that being said, this is the meat and potatoes of Athena. Now, who is this for exactly? When I was using Amazon Athena, it was mostly to query data really quickly. A client was giving me a file, put it into an S3 bucket so I could start querying off of it. And that was it. Most of the time, we didn't have a full scale production environment over on this left-hand side here with tables and views and databases. We kept the data separate, of course, for different clients and different projects, but this was not our primary place to go. I have consulted and worked with other teams where I come in and they're like, hey, here's where we're trying to get. We're trying to get to this place. And I'm like, okay, show me your current, setup, how you're working with your data, how your data flows work and everything like that. And they'll come in and they're like, we're only using Amazon Athena for querying data and creating workflows and automations. If you want to be able to scale to a much larger scale, this won't work. There are several limitations within Amazon Athena as you try to scale, as you try to add more data sources, as you try to automate all these things, it gets very difficult to do within Amazon Athena. And so that's when you need to start creating different databases, like using something like RDS or another type of SQL server where you can store your data, just not within Amazon Athena. Hitting off of S3 buckets as your main way to create kind of your database is not optimal by any means. And so that might work for kind of a smaller company who's just trying to hit off some data, but it doesn't work at scale very well. So Amazon Athena is really good for getting quick insights into your data. It's really good when you have a ton of data stored in S3 and you just want to get simple insights into it, want to do simple joins, aggregations, and you're not trying to do anything too complex with it. This is a great place to go because it's actually very cheap compared to other resources and tools within AWS. This really shouldn't be used as a full-scale database, especially as your company gets larger. You run into a lot of roadblocks, a lot of issues, and I've seen that firsthand. And so it's just not something I'm going to recommend. But Amazon Athena definitely has its place, and that's why we're looking at it, because you most likely, if you're using AWS, you're working as a data scientist, data analyst, business analyst, you'll use Amazon Athena. A lot of companies have it. A lot of companies will use it. And so I hope that this was helpful. I hope you're able to get up and running, understand some of the nuances, especially with the folder paths. I always found that a little bit confusing until I just used it more. But understanding how to put your tables in to the healthcare in here and actually get that metadata folders working as well. Now within the Glue umbrella, which includes Glue DataBrew, it's mostly for building pipelines and creating ETL processes. This is how you get data from one place to another. You can extract data, transform data, load the data, and do a ton of other things with it. So in this video, we're gonna take a look at both Glue and Glue DataBrew because they're slightly different and they have different purposes. So without further ado, let's jump on my screen and take a look. All right, let's go down here. We're gonna go down to Analytics. Now we're going to be taking a look at both AWS Glue DataBrew and AWS Glue. Now we're going to start with DataBrew because I think it's a little bit more user-friendly. There's some nice animations. The UI is really a little bit, I would say, easier to understand. And this is often a place where you'll come for a lot of your transformations. So let's come in here. And you can go ahead and take a look at a lot of stuff in here. On this right-hand side, we have data sets, projects, recipes, jobs, and we'll take a look at a few of those while we're in here. And you can look at some of the benefits as well. And Glue DataBrew is awesome. It's very much a more visual way to prepare your data, and even says it's a visual data preparation tool. And so it's a way to visualize how your data is changing, and you can see how it's changing. We are not going to just create a project. We're going to create a sample project. And this is going to give us some sample data. We're going to work with it. We're going to be cleaning it up, transforming it a little bit, and then we'll see how we can automate that as well. So let's go ahead and create our sample project. Let's go ahead and select popular baby names in 2020. And then we have to go down here and choose a role name. Now, we haven't talked a lot about IAM roles within AWS, but for certain things like Glue, DataBrew, Glue, and a few other things, you need IAM access. So you can say create new IAM role, and that's what we're going to do. Let's go down here. And we need to actually create a new role for AWS Glue Brew service. So it's going to create it, and I'll explain that in just a little bit. We'll call this one Alex the Analyst, and I'll call it DataBrew. Let's go ahead and create this project. Now this needs to set up our session. It's provisioning some compute and getting our session ready, getting our data ready, all of these things in order to use DataBrew. But while we're in here and while we're waiting for this to be ready, I want to talk a little bit about the UI. So over here, we have something called a recipe. Now the recipe is for when we actually use all of these things and we apply different changes to the data set. We make any transformations, whether we join the data, we group the data, we pivot the data, it's going to say, okay, you did this, and then this, and then this, and then this, and you can come in here and you can edit this. And so you can say, oh, I don't want to actually group it. Let me get rid of that. And that'll be really easy to do. And I'll show you that in a little bit. But then we can also save this recipe. We can just say, oh, I want to save this for a future data set. Or if you want to use that recipe on, if you're bringing in multiple data sets of the same exact data, or you have multiple data sets coming in that are all the same, then you may use the same recipe on all of them to transform that data consistently every single time. Looks like our data is done, or our session is ready, but let's look at this top area. So this is where we can make all of our transformations. We can filter, we can sort, we can come in here and we can click on the clean, and you'll notice there are tons of different options in here. A lot of ones that you should be pretty familiar with if you've ever cleaned data before, or if you've ever done any of my projects in MySQL or Excel or Tableau or Python and all these different ones on data cleaning. These are a lot of really popular things in order to clean the data. And so there's clean, extract. You can look at duplicates, outliers, you can merge your data, you can perform functions, you can apply different functions to your data. We also have things like pivot, group, join, union, and others. And there's just a ton in here. Now, what we're going to do is first we're going to look at our data, and then we're going to go through and we're going to do a few changes to it so you can see how the recipes work, and then we'll save our recipe. So let's come in here. This is a new data set to both of us. This is our baby names data. So we have count, we have gender, we have the ID, we have the name, and then the year. And so this is pretty interesting information. Let's see if it's all 1880. This looks like just a small sample of the data. And we can come in here and we can also take a look at what kind of data types they assigned to this data as well. Now, what we're going to do is something quite simple. We just want to look at the male names, and we want to take a look at the most popular male names per year. So that's going to require a bit of grouping. So we're going to have to group on both the year and the name. And then we're going to have to filter based off of the gender. Now, one other thing to note is that right now we're just working with a sample of the data. When we actually get to the final process and we actually create this data cleaning process, we can apply this to the entire data set, or we can apply it to the sample. So right now we're just going to be working with this sample, but we'll of course be using the full data set later on. And you can even come up here and you can look at this. You can say first n rows, last n rows, and random. Now, right now, we're just looking at the first n rows, the first 500 rows of our data set, and that may not be a perfect sample size. It actually may be better to pull random rows, because what if we have male or female or other things? Right now, it just looks like we have female in our sample, and that may not be representative of the entire data set. So let's come here to random rows. Let's choose 500. And we're going to load this sample. And as you can see, we do have males in here. And so I'm really glad we did that, because now we kind of have a better representation of our data. And so I think what we need to do, let's bring over our recipe. I think what we need to do, or what we're going to do, is one, I want to filter where the gender is equal to male. And then we're going to come over here and we're going to try to find the most common name per year. Or maybe we'll just group by the year and the name and do a count on the name. I think that would be really interesting. So we're really transforming it quite a bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to filter on this gender. So we're going to go over here to filter. And we're going to go down to by condition. Now we want to say where gender is equal to male. So you can either do contains, and we can do contains in M, or we can say it is exactly. Either one of these will be perfectly fine. We're going to do that on gender right here. So we have 300 females, 200 males. We don't want the females, so we can get rid of that one. We're going to only keep the males. We can also enter a value in here, but we don't need to do that. And so now this is ready to go. We're going to go down and we can either preview changes, but we're just going to go ahead and apply this. And as you can see right here in our recipe, it says under our applied steps, we have filter values by gender. We can either edit this or we can delete this. So at any time, if we want to change any of this, we can do that. But as you can see in our preview, in our sample, we now only have 200 rows and it's all filtered by males. Now what we can do is we're going to group this data. We want to do it based off of the year and the name. So let's come up here. We're going to group and we need to select our columns. So we're going to start with the year and we're going to group by the year. And then we're going to select the name as well. And we'll come down here and we'll say group by. But we also wanted, and you'll notice, we also wanted to aggregate these values. So we want the count. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to say, based off of the name, we want a count of the names for that year and name. So we're going to do a count here. And so for this new column, you can call it the name count, and that'll be perfectly fine. This is just like an example down here, but it shouldn't be a string. This should be an integer. And so if we come down here, let's see, there should be some that have multiple higher than one, at least not in our preview. But still, we're working on a sample here. So let's go ahead and finish this. And now we have our data right here. Now, again, this is only working off the 200 rows. We could have 100,000, 50,000 in our data. But we grouped off of the year, and then we grouped off of the name, and then we got a count of the name. Now, what we need to do is I also want to sort on this year. And we can do that just by sorting here manually. So we can come over here and it's just going to do this within our window. But I actually want to apply a sort to here. So I want to do this ascending. So the smallest year to the largest year. We'll do this based off of the year. Then we'll come down here. we'll click apply. And now we have our years over here in ascending from smallest all the way down to largest. So now that we've applied all of our steps and really transform our data on our sample data set, let's go ahead and save this recipe. We're gonna go ahead and publish this. So you can add some notes if you would like. We're gonna publish this. And so now we've saved that recipe. And in fact, if we come over here to recipes, you can see that we've saved this. So we have that available. And if we go back to our projects, we can come up here and we can create this job. So we're going to call this one the name aggregator. This is the data set associated with it. And we can choose our output. So where do we want this output to be? Let's put it in S3. We can keep it right here. Let's go to our S3 location. And let's just put it in the Alex the Analyst bucket. Let's select that. And we have some additional options down here. So we have some advanced settings. One, the maximum number of units. So that's to do with how many nodes you want on this job when it actually runs. You can specify if it times out or how many times you want it to retry it. This one is probably the more important one, is if you want to schedule this right here. So you can come in here and you can create a new schedule and you can specify, I want this recurring every, and this says 1 hour, but maybe you want it recurring or doing it on a specific time of the month. And you want to automate this and run this maybe every week or every month and get an output of the data that you have. So this can be really, really useful. You can add tags. For permissions, we just need to specify our role, and we can create and run this job. Now, it's going to take a little bit to run because it's going to be working in a much larger data set. But in a little bit, it's going to run this entire job. It's going to output our CSV into our S3 bucket, and then we're going to go and take a look at it. So let's go over here to jobs and see its status is still running. Let's wait for just a little bit, and it's going to be doing that on the entire project. It's not just going to be doing that on the sample. It's using the full data set. And so let's wait for this to be done, and then let's go look at our output. As you can see, it succeeded. It took about 2 minutes. It finished up very quickly, or just a second ago. Let's come up here to our S3 bucket, and it should be right in here. So let's go ahead and refresh this. And now you can see we have this new folder, name aggregator. Let's click in it. And now we have all of these CSVs. Now this is to be expected because this is the default option within Glue DataBrew. I personally do not like this. I want a single CSV output, as I'm sure most of you do. Let's come back up here to our jobs and let's go into this name aggregator. Let's come over here and we're going to select edit job. And now we have right here, this is our job that we just created. Now what we need to do is get rid of this. We need to go to settings because right now, for file partitioning, we have file output options, auto generate files, default file output setting that generates multiple files. This usually results in the fastest job runtime, which can be important for some use cases, especially as you scale your company or your business or your department. You know, these things do matter a lot, but for what we're doing, we want a single file output. We also have an option out here for our file storage where we can create a new folder for each run or replace output files for each job run. We'll keep it the create, but depending on what you're doing, you may want to replace it as well. Let's go ahead and save this. Then we're going to come down here and we're going to save it as well. And now we need to actually run this. So now we're going to click run job and we're going to run the same one except as a single file output. Let's go ahead and run this. Now it's going to be running. It's going to take a little bit longer than the minute 37 seconds, but hopefully not by a lot. So let's wait just a little bit and then we will see what it looks like in our S3 bucket. All right, this succeeded and somehow took less time. So AWS is just messing with us right now. They're lying to us completely. Let's go back to our bucket. We're going to come back just to the bucket. Let's go ahead and refresh this. There's our next one. I think this is the second one. They have different names, obviously, because we didn't overwrite. Let's come into here, and now we have our CSV. You can go ahead and download that. And in fact, I'm not just going to tell you to download it. I'll download it too. So let's come in here. Let's go and download this. All right, let's open this up, and let's take a look. So let's come over here. Let's filter this real quick, because there's a lot in here, I'm assuming. Let's come over. And it looks like there's only most common name per year. Apparently, I completely misunderstood the data. This is probably what they did was they told us the most common year or the most common name per year. And I just wasn't thinking about it. So I think we misunderstood the assignment. Actually, you know what? I'll take the blame. I'll take the blame. I misunderstood the assignment, but we do have 25,779 rows. And so, just a little example of how to use it, although I'm not an expert on that data set, so I take full blame for that. But you can see the process that we took on how to clean the data, change the data, and get a correct CSV output. Let's go back over to AWS. Let's go back to our Analyst bucket, and we'll stick right here for just a second. Now, one thing to note, and this is something that some people may have encountered when they were trying to run this job. It may say, oh, you don't have access or the ability to do that. You may have gotten an error in some way. What you may need to do, and this is something that my friend Kasoon over at Analyst Builder, he helped me understand, is that sometimes AWS doesn't give you full functionality until you have certain services running, like an EC2 instance. Now, we're not covering EC2 instances in this series, but you may need to come in here into the EC2, and you can just go to services, make sure to go to EC2. And you may need to just launch an instance and just launch it. And what happened after I launched it was it sent me an email and said, hey, you now have full functionality for different things. It's super easy. Just come in here, make sure you select your pair. You can just say you don't want one, and then you launch an instance, and that's it. And after that, you'll hopefully within a few minutes or within the day, you'll get an email saying you have full functionality. You may need to do this. That's just something I want to make mention of because I know I encountered that when I first did it. Now, I had never encountered this before because I've used it in a workplace where somebody already had all this stuff set up, right? This is a fully functioning production and development environment, and so I didn't have to worry about this. But this is a completely new account. And so this is a free instance. You don't have to spend money on this because you get 2 EC2 free tier offers, and you can use those, and it should be good to go. And you need to do that for what we're about to do in just a second, but just wanted to mention this. So that is how you can use Glue DataBrew. And of course, I want you to get in here. I want you to take a look at a bunch of this other stuff. You can create rules as well for invalidating your data, and you can send yourself emails if it doesn't look good. You can come in here and look at all your data sets that you have. This is the one that we were using, the dataset national baby names. And of course, you can always connect to new data sets. So if you want to come in here, you want to pull data out of an S3 bucket or from Redshift or other options within AWS, you can do that. So all really, really good stuff. Now, let's go back. We're going to go to all services and click up here. We are going to go all the way down to Glue. Now, here's what I'll say about Glue before we even click into it. Glue DataBrew is very visual. I think it's actually fairly easy to use compared to Glue. Glue, I think, is a little bit more complicated. Not entirely, but it is. And so let's look at Glue really quickly. Now, over on this left-hand side, we have a ton of different stuff. And we're not going to be looking at everything in here. I'm going to look at kind of the more important things, but we have something like a data catalog. And this we looked at in our lesson with Amazon Athena. They have the data catalog to set up your databases and tables and your schemas. And we had crawlers. Now, this is the first thing that we're going to look at within Glue, because this is how you can kind of automate pulling in data, getting the data types and pulling in that data. And so it's really useful. The next is creating ETL jobs. So those are the two things that we'll be looking at in this lesson. But there's a ton of other things that it does. So be sure to get in here and just check everything out, because Glue does a lot of different stuff. And I'm just not covering everything, of course, because this would be a 10-hour lesson. So we have a few different things. One, you can prepare your account for AWS Glue. Here's your catalog for your data sets. And then here's how you move and transform your data. And so what we're going to do is we will need to set up roles and users. We're just not going to do it right now, but we will need to set that up. And I'm actually going to show you some of the IAM, on the back in the IAM resource, how that actually looks. But let's come over here to crawlers. And we don't have any crawlers created, but we need to. Let's create a crawler. And let's create this, and we'll call this the Alex the Analyst crawler example. Let's go ahead and click next. Now we need to specify our data source. Now, just let me back up 1 second. We want to pull in data to be able to use it in different services, and we want to do it kind of automatically, like I mentioned. And so let's say we're pulling in data and we want to put it into a database, or we want to pull in data and we want to put it into Athena. These are things that we can automate. And so we want to specify a data source here. So let's go ahead and add a data source. We have our S3 bucket. That's what we want to do. And this is data that we used in previous lessons. So if you didn't take those lessons, be sure to go and do that. So we're going to browse this data. Let's go into the Alex Analyst bucket. We're going to go into patient data. We can specify single files, but let me just tell you, it won't work. And that's just because of how the folder system works within Glue. So we need to specify the entire patient data folder. Let's go ahead and choose this. And now we have on subsequent crawler runs, crawl all subfolders only if you add new subfolders to your folder, and then based off of an event. So an event would be like something triggering, and then it runs based off of that. So we're just going to do crawl all subfolders. Let's add this data source. Let's go ahead and click next. Now this is the part where we need to select an IAM role. We don't have one. So let's go ahead and create a new IAM role. I'm going to call this Alex Glue Crawler role. You can call this anything. Let's go ahead and create this. And it says it successfully created it. Let's go ahead and view this. So now we're in a totally different part of AWS. This is the identity and access management. That's our IAM. So right here, we created an IAM role. This is the Alex Glue Crawler role. And then down here, we have the permissions policies. So right here, this is going to be giving us access to, I believe, the S3 bucket. We can come in here and actually look at the policy. So the permissions are read and write on a specific data source. And that's going to be our bucket with the patient data. And I think we can come up here to policy versions. Look right here. And so this is what it looks like inside of it. Now this is in JSON, and you can actually customize these, and I'm not going to go into all how to do that, but sometimes you need to, depending on the data source, if it's encrypted, if it's not, what permissions you want it to do. But what this is doing is it's allowing us to get an object and put an object in this specific resource. So that's our patient data, and that star is just a wildcard to say anything in that file path. So if we go back, and let's come back to this role, we also have this AWS Glue service role. Now this one right here, we created when we created the crawler to specify the file path of the data set. This is AWS managed. This is one that AWS creates themselves, and we can look at all the things. Let me scroll down. We can look at all the things that it does for that AWS Glue service role. Gives us access to a ton of things for EC2 instances, S3, everything within Glue. And we can come down here and take a look at the buckets, the access to S3, as well as a bunch of other stuff. And so this is what the IAM roles look like. And you can create custom policies if you want to, and you can give access to different things. And so again, we're not covering this entirely in this lesson because this is not a lesson on IAM roles, but I think it is interesting and worth knowing. So we've created our role. Let's go down over here. Let's click next. And now we need to specify where we're going to be putting this. So we're going to put this data in our healthcare data. So this is our healthcare data again. We already had created this database back in our Amazon Athena, and we have the option to create a table name prefix or choose the maximum table threshold. For the prefix, let's just say crawler. There we go. And now we have this crawler schedule down here. Now you can do it on demand, or you can specify whether you want a specific day of the month, whether weekly, daily, monthly, whatever you need, you can create this scheduler in order to run this crawler. Let's go ahead and click next. And let's just review this real quick. This is everything that we chose. We're gonna go ahead and create our crawler. So now it says one crawler was successfully created. It's this one right here, Alex the Analyst crawler example. And it has not run yet. So we have no crawler runs, but let's go ahead and run this crawler. So now we're going to start the crawler. It's going to start up this that we just created to pull in that patient data. And once it is completed, we're going to go take a look at it in Amazon Athena like we looked at in a previous lesson. So right down here, it says it's running. So once that's done running, we're going to take a look at that data. All right, it says that was completed. Now we can come back here to the data catalog connections. Let's go ahead and refresh this. You can see we have our crawler, that's our prefix that we use, and we have patient data. This patient data and patient data 2 were data catalogs, and part of our data catalog are tables that we created in Amazon Athena. Now let's come up here. Let's just duplicate this really quickly. We're gonna go back to Amazon Athena. Let's see if it's right here. So here we go. We have Athena. And now we can access that data right here. So now if we want to, I can say, let's just preview the table. It's running and we have our data in here. And so this is perfect. If you remember, we had our patient data and patient data 2. We manually entered that data to pull that in. And that was not super fun. So when we created it, we did it from an S3 bucket data. But with the AWS Glue crawler, we can do this automatically, and then it'll refresh our data. And we can create this without having to manually do this every time we get a new data source, which, let me tell you, when you start getting into a production environment or a development environment, whichever one you're in, when you have to start bringing in lots of data and the data is coming in daily or weekly or monthly, you do not want to have to manually do this. It takes up so much time. It is much better to automate this with an AWS Glue crawler. So that's during that scheduling part right in here. And we come over to crawlers. We come in here. This is just on demand, but we can edit this. And we come down here and we can schedule it down here if we want to. But you can also, now we have it on demand. So anytime we want to run it, we can also just run it on demand. So it's, really, really great to have and use. So that's how we use crawlers. And crawlers are amazing. Oftentimes, if you're using this in your work, you're going to have tons of them, like 50 to 100 of them running, and you'll be scheduling them, and some of them will break because a data set changed or whatever. And so this is a really great thing to test out, try with different data sets, and really get familiar with it because crawlers are amazing. Let's go down here. Let's go to ETL jobs. So this is the last thing that we're going to be taking a look at in this lesson. There is, of course, more to AWS Glue, but this is kind of like the two most important things I would say. So let's go over here to a visual ETL. And what we're going to do is we're going to build out, I don't think I have an unsaved job. We're going to build out our very first ETL job within AWS Glue. Now, what we have here, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a little bit, we have parent node and we have the child node. I think it's node, if that's the right term, but we have parent and child different nodes that we have in here, and we need to make sure we chain them properly. Now, luckily, we have this ETL visual tool, and that's what we're in right now, so we'll be able to see what we're doing when we're in here. Now, let's come over here and let's go back to our sources because we have to have a source to start out with. So let's go to Amazon S3, and we're going to click into this Amazon S3. So we're going to pull data from our Amazon S3 bucket. We need to specify our location, and we can either make it recursive or not recursive. And I'll explain that in just a second. Now, let's come in here. We'll go into our bucket. We'll go into our patient data. Now let's specify just this first file here. We really don't need recursive because we don't have any subdirectories. So we can turn that off or you can keep it on. We also have a data format. Our data format is not no format. We have a CSV format, which is comma separated. Now what it's kind of prompting us to do down here, and I highly recommend doing it, is getting a data preview. So we can see the data as we're transforming it and changing it. So I am going to come in here and I am going to specify this role that we had created earlier. And we're going to start this session. Now, this could take just a little bit of time, but we're going to get a data preview down right here at the bottom. And now our data preview is ready. We're looking at this file right here. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to come over here to add a node. And we're going to go to transform and we're going to join. Now we have to specify a few things here. One, we can name this, so it's just called a join. Next, our node parent, and this is what I was talking about before with the parents. So this parent is our first data source, which is just called Amazon S3, which we could change. We can come in here, we can call this patient data 1. We can call this patient data 1. Then we'll come down here, we can go to the join, and notice if you come in here, we only have one data source. So we need to specify a second data source. Let's come back out here. Let's come up, let's go back to our sources, and we'll pull in our second one. I'm actually gonna change this view really quickly. I like it going left to right, but some people like it going up to down. You can just do that using this button right here, which is the direction, but I like this direction a little better. So we're gonna come into this bucket. Let's call this patient data 2. And let's specify our other patient data, which is our second, which is number 2, which actually says file 1 in it, but just ignore that. Okay. But we are going to do that right there. We already have our preview. And now we need to go back to our join and specify these are the two things that we are joining together. Now, if we do an inner join, it's not going to work because these data sets are extremely familiar. In fact, if we come in here and look at the data, there aren't any patient datas to join on or patient IDs to join on. They're all unique. And so what we're going to do is we should actually be doing a union here. Let's actually get rid of this. You know what? That was my mistake. Let's go to transform. Let's come down. Let's find a union, or let me search for it. So I'm going to do a union. So we're going to do a union right here. There we go. And let's go into our union, and we're going to specify our parent nodes. We have boom and boom. That's 1 and 2. And it's going to be working on this data preview. There we go. Let's scroll down a little bit. And now they're all in there, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. File 1 and file 2, which is actually file 1 and file 2. So we are good to go. This is looking really, really good. Let's come back here and let's take a look at what comes next. So we've created our sources. We had 2 data sources. Let me pull this over here. And I can't pull this over anymore. But we have our data sources. And again, you can pull this data in from anywhere. We've done 1 transformation. Now we can do other transformations as well. We can even write a SQL query. We can look at filling in missing values if we need to. We can aggregate our data, drop duplicates. These are a lot of the different things that we looked at in Glue DataBrew. And there's even more options in here as well. They're kind of unique to Glue. But lastly, what we need to do is then we need to specify our target location. Where do we actually want this data to go? And so we can put it into things like an Azure SQL database. It could go into Snowflake. It can go into a SQL Server, Postgres, MySQL, Redshift, or we can just put it back in an S3 bucket, which is by far the most simplest thing you can do. We could also take this data and put it into the Glue data catalog. And so if we want to use this in Athena, we have a much bigger process, and then we want to put it into or query that data in Athena, we can do that. So there's a lot of different places and things that we can do. Let's just come back and put it into an S3 bucket because that is going to be the simplest thing to do. So we have our process, and there at the very end, we're going to put it into a CSV file. We don't need any type of compression here. But we do have an option, data catalog update options. Let me zoom in while we're here. We have our data catalog update options. So we can create a table in the data catalog on subsequent runs, update the schema and add new partitions, or we can create a table in data catalog and on subsequent runs, keep existing schema and add new partitions. So I'm going to click on this one right here, and we'll specify our database. That's going to be our healthcare data. Our table name, we'll call this one the ETL, I'll do underscore, patient underscore data. And then we'll come up here for our S3 target location. So we're going to come back. We'll just place it in the Alex the Analyst bucket. Let's go ahead and choose this. And we have a fully functioning ETL process. We took 2 data sets, we union them together, and then we have our output. And of course, we can see every step of the way what we're doing here. Now, if we wanted to, because we already have this full process, right? If we wanted to, what if we wanted to add in an extra part? Let's say we wanted to come in here and we wanted to transform this union. Let's do an aggregation. So we wanted to perform an aggregation on this. So let's go to aggregation. Now, this doesn't look right? We can't union it and then aggregate it and also send it out. Well, we can, but it doesn't really make sense for what we're doing. So what we're going to do is, let's say we want to union on maybe a diagnosis and look at the average age, or maybe a treatment, could be anything. But let's come down here. Let's click on this aggregate. What we want to do is we want to put it where this is its parent. And then for the S3, the new parent for this is going to be the aggregation. So this is correct because you can see we have this line flowing here. This part is correct. We will need to aggregate it in just a second, but we need to come up here and we need to change this parent node to the aggregate and then get rid of the union. And so now we've changed our workflow here. We've changed the ETL process. So now we need to go to aggregate. Now we're going to come over here and we need to be able to aggregate our data. So you have to select the fields to group by, and we have to perform our aggregation on a specific column. But when we come in here, notice all of these are string. We have string, 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 and string. And that's not correct. That's actually incorrect. What we need to do is we need to come in here, and after this union, we need to add an additional step. That's going to be our change schema. And Then we'll select this aggregate real quick, and we're going to put it on the change schema. There we go. So we're just adding multiple steps here, but we need to specify what our data actually is. And we can see when we make the change, what will happen. So we can keep this, or we can make this an integer. The name is going to be a string. The age needs to be an integer as well. We have string for both of these, and then a file needs to be an integer. And so this is looking really, really good. Everything should be working properly. We shouldn't have any mistakes. Oftentimes it'll show all blanks if you're doing something wrong. So now we can come over here to our aggregation and say we want to do this based off of the diagnosis. Then we come down to here. This is the aggregation. Which field do we want to aggregate on? It's going to be on age. And we'll just let's do an average. Just keeping it simple. So now this is good. And we can even take a look at this right here. So this is our data that we're going to be outputting into a CSV file. And then for our data target, we've already specified everything that we need. And of course, creating the data catalog as well. So this is ready to go. Let's go ahead and let's go over to job details just really quick. We want to change this. We're going to say first ETL. There we go. We can come down here, and there's a few different things that you can change if you want. You can change the type of job that it's going to be. You can change the glue version, the language, the worker type, a bunch of different stuff in here, but I don't recommend you doing any of that if I'm being honest. The other thing while we're in here, and I'm just going to mention this, although I'm not going to show this to you because this gets quite complicated. I do cover this in the AWS and Azure course on Analyst Builder, but it gets a little bit complicated in here. But this is the code that's being generated from your visual. So this visual is actually writing to a .py file. Now you can get in here and change a lot of things. And actually it's helpful if you want certain functionalities to get in here and change these things. But we're not going to be doing that in this lesson. I just wanted to show this to you. If you want to edit the script, you won't be able to use the visual ETL anymore because that's for kind of simpler visual things where you're doing it exactly how they have it kind of made for you. But if you want to go and start doing custom things, which you can do, and it's pretty awesome, you're just going to have to confirm this and then you won't be able to use the visual anymore. So just be warned, that is something. So job has not been saved. Let's go ahead and save this. This is our first ETL. We successfully created this and now we need to run this. So let's go ahead and run this. Let's go to our run details. This process is running and we had multiple steps of our first ETL job that we created. Now we're going to let it run. And then when it's done running, we'll take a look at the output. Now it looks like our run failed. This happens. Let's see what actually occurs. It says an error occurred when calling the .py write dynamic frame, access denied. So let's go back. Let's go to visual. Let's go see which role we actually took, or maybe that's in a different place because maybe we need to go to the IAM and give different options here. And here we go. So now we have this AWS Glue service role. Let's come over here. Let's go in and actually look at this Glue crawler role. Maybe we'll give it admin privileges just for this example, though you probably wouldn't do that in real life. But let's go over to, let's go over to the EC2 because we don't need that one. Let's go to the IAM. So let's go back to all services. It should be right over here. Yep, in the security identity compliance. Let's click into here. Let's go to our roles. And it should be this Alex Glue crawler role. Let's make sure that's the right one. Alex Glue crawler role. So let's go into this Alex Glue crawler role. It's tough to say. It is possible that we didn't have the correct access. So let's go into, I guess we are getting, we're getting a lesson in a little bit in IAM. We're going to attach a policy to this. We're just going to give our guy straight up admin access. So we're going to say admin. Now there's a bunch of different admins in here. There should be one just says admin full access. Maybe it's this one. Yeah, it's allow everything. So this is the one we're looking for. So we're just going to attach this policy to this person. I think it was an S3 thing. I think we just didn't have access to the correct bucket or something. I'm not 100% sure. But this is saved. It was attached to the role. Let's go and try to run this again. So let's go, it's our visual, but we can just run this again. And then we'll go to runs. And hopefully this will not fail again. If it does, we'll try to work through it, right? These things happen. This is very common. So Let's go ahead and give it a go and see if this one works this time. And just like that, we figured it out. We always do. It succeeded. So it's just a permission issue. And believe it or not, that is extremely, extremely common. So that succeeded. Let's go over here to our query editor. Let's go ahead and refresh this. We have our ETL patient data. Let's go ahead and preview this table. Now it's being separated by commas. It doesn't look like it separated out exactly how we wanted it, or maybe we did it wrong. I'm not sure, but it's in there. It's just not in the right format. So that's something you can definitely fix. Let's go over to our bucket. Let's go right here and refresh this. If we come down here, we have a ton of these really tiny files, like 21 bytes, really, really tiny. Let's go down to the bottom. This unsave. Let's see what this is. We have these CSVs in here. Let's go into this really quick and let's download this and let's open this up. And so this is our original data, it looks like. So this is part of the original data set. This is not part of our actual output. Let's go back. If we come down here, let's take a look at any of these. This is just part of the run object, and so that is not a file. And let's scroll down. So we're getting this really weird output. Let's actually go back. Let's go back to our visual. And so for the format, we chose CSV, which should be fine. We have compression type as none, but maybe we need a compression type. And then we're putting this in the healthcare data. And so maybe we don't want the CSV type, or maybe we need some type of compression. Maybe we need to zip this up. So let's try doing this in something like a Parquet file. Really great file. Maybe we want to put in a snappy compression. Feeling wild. I'm going to keep it like this just for now. Let's try it, but it looks like we need to aggregate this properly. And so let's go back in here. Let's choose diagnosis. I guess it forgot what we were doing over here. We'll do age, aggregate function is average. And now that's working again. So let's go over here. Let's try a Parquet file. Let's save this. And then we are going to run this. Let's come over here to run details and let's let that run and see what happens. And it looks like this one failed. Let's come back over here. Looks like we may need some compression. Let's go back to our visual. Let's add snappy compression, although I'm not a fan. Let's go ahead and save this. And let's run this. And let's try again. All right, this one succeeded. Let's go down here. Let's click refresh really quick. Let's go down to our patient data. Actually, we have it right here. Let's go ahead and run again. Let's go down, still doing the same thing. Let's go to our S3 bucket. I should have cleaned this up first because now it's just going to keep getting messy. But if we scroll down, now we have all of these Parquet files. Now this is still a lot better than what we had because now we can pull in these Parquet files and we can join them together. And that's just kind of a typical run with an ETL job. And so this is actually a lot better. If we want it all in one file, unfortunately, there is not a very easy way to do this. We can come in here and go to Amazon S3. There's not really a great way or an easy way to be able to do this. And so what you need to do if you want it all in one file or you want it in a specific format, you have to script it out yourself. Again, it's not crazy hard to do once you've gotten in here and you kind of understand a little bit. But if you want to be able to do some of these custom things within using ETL, this is how you do it. Within the visual, it kind of limits you. So this would still be good. This type of ETL process would still be perfectly fine because it's just going to append all of this data if you're putting it into a database or something like that. That'd be perfectly fine. And so not as clean of an output as DataBrew was when we were working with these ones up here, but we are able to do different things that DataBrew isn't able to do within Glue Studio. And so this is how you use it. This is how you create these ETL jobs. Sometimes you got to get in and you have to customize a little bit to get the exact output that you want or are looking for. But I'm gonna have to come in here. I'm going to clean this up because this is a mess now. But this is how you use Glue and Glue DataBrew. Once you get in here and start trying it out and messing with all this stuff, you'll understand, right? As you start using it more, this is not uncommon. This actually happens all the time and is not a bad thing if you know how to use the data correctly. Now, like I said, there is a ton more to AWS Glue than just these two things, although those are kind of some of the bigger things that I wanted you to know how to use. But there are things like workflows and triggers and things like schemas. And these are, of course, the most popular ones. So make sure to know these ones, and we covered some of them in this lesson. But Glue is very expansive, and you're going to use it for a lot of different things. Now, if you're a data analyst and you're working on something like a data collection team, which is something that I worked on for many years, then you might be getting in here and using this quite a bit. But if you're just a data analyst and you're waiting for the data engineer or database developer or whoever's bringing in this data, if you're waiting for them to bring in the data, most likely you're not going to get in here that much. You might inform them. You might say, hey, I was looking at the data looks bad, or there was something wrong with it. So you're looking for quality issues immediately. Then you'd relay that to a data engineer and say, hey, could you go and check out that job that brought in that data? And then they would go and check it. That's typically how that would actually work. So just something to be aware of with Glue. But Glue DataBrew, and Glue crawlers, as well as ETL, all stuff that I recommend you testing out, trying out, figuring out how it all fits together and works. Now, Quicksight is AWS's data visualization tool. And so a lot of companies, when they get into AWS's ecosystem, they have really simple needs for their data visualization, and they just use the internal tool, which is Quicksight. It's not the most robust tool you've ever seen in your life, but we're gonna take a look and see how it actually works. And I'll make a lot of comparisons to things like Power BI and Tableau, which are really popular data visualization tools. So without further ado, let's jump on my screen and take a look. Let's scroll down. Let's go to Analytics. And under the Analytics, we have Quicksight right here. Now, in order to get started with Quicksight, we actually have to create an account. So we have to sign up for Quicksight. So let's go ahead and say sign up for Quicksight. For the authentication method, we just want to use the IAM federated identities. You can use some of these other ones if you'd like. Be sure to specify your region. Make sure you fill out your account info. And then down here, you can use an existing role, or you can just use the Quicksight manage role. Highly recommend just using default, much easier. And allow access and auto discovery for these resources. So if you want them to be able to use your S3 buckets, be sure to click on your S3 bucket, and we can say, here's the bucket we want. Maybe I'll just choose both of them. But here are the buckets that we want you to be able to access, as well as all these other things as well. And then we'll come down here, and we don't want paginated reports, and then we'll click finish. So now it's creating our account, and then we'll get access in just a second. All right, that took about 10 seconds. This is the name that I gave our account for Quicksight. And let's go ahead and go to Quicksight. This is what's new in Quicksight. Let's go ahead and close out of that. Now, this is the UI for Quicksight. Now, just before we get into, creating stuff and building stuff and all these different things, I just want to talk about Quicksight in general. This is AWS's tool for data visualization. And of course, there are other options. There's Power BI, there's Looker, there's Tableau. There's lots of different options, and all those are perfectly acceptable. And in fact, in some instances, they may be better for some things. But within AWS's ecosystem, this is their BI data visualization tool. And so because it's already integrated into all their services, it does make it a little bit easier to use than some of the other ones. And that's what they're hoping for. They're hoping you use their services and stay in their ecosystem, so you don't have to go anywhere else for any service ever, because AWS wants your money and your business, of course. Now, within Quicksight, you can share reports. You can create folders that you can share with customers and clients. You can create dashboards. You can, of course, create stories. We have analysis, data sets, and topics. And then over here, we have some sample analysis. So these are different things that they've already created visualizations for. But the first thing I want to show you is right over here in data sets. Now, these are the data sets that we already have access to. Sales pipeline. Let's just click in on one. We get a very slight overview of kind of what this data looks like. We can refresh this data. And so if we're connected to a data source, we can refresh this, or we can schedule this. And then we can look at permissions and usage for people who have access to this data and how they can use it as well. So just some interesting things within data sets. If we want a new data set, we just come in here and we specify where we want to pull in our data, whether it's an S3 bucket, or we want to upload a file, or it's coming in from Athena. There's a lot of different places that we can pull it in. There is something up here I just want to note. We're not actually going to be pulling in any data for this. We're going to be using one of their samples just for demonstration purposes. But there's something called SPICE in here. SPICE actually stands for Super Fast Parallel In-Memory Calculation Engine, and it's used to do things really quickly in Quicksight. But for example, let's just say we were uploading a file. We can choose SQL database output. I don't even know what's in that file. Let's see what the preview says. Okay, we have some products. This is our products file. But let's say we select next. We want to bring in this file. It's going to import it into SPICE. And so that's going to cost money. That's going to put it into their super fast parallel in-memory calculation engine. And then you are going to pay for that service. Now, that isn't always the case. We don't have to. We're not going to do that. We're going to cancel that import. But you don't always have to do that, especially if you have other types of data connections to like MySQL or PostgreSQL. You may not need that, but just be aware of what that is because that does cost money. Let's go up here to Quicksight. We're going to come on back and let's take a look at some of these samples that they have. Let's go into this sales pipeline analysis. So right now we're working with sample data and we're not going to be doing a full project in here in Quicksight. Really what we're doing is just seeing how it works and how everything is built out and how you can customize and build out your own dashboards analysis as well. So if you come in here, you can see that we have different types of visualizations, very standard types of visualizations for any BI tool. And if we click into one of these, let's say we're clicking into this one, you'll see we have an x-axis, a value, and a color. On the left-hand side, we also have all of our fields, and you can see whether it's a dimension or if it is a measure. Next, you can see that up here we have our data set. This is the data that we are using. And right over here is the type of visualization chart. Now, this should look really familiar if you're familiar with Tableau or Power BI, both of which I have series on YouTube. But these are different types of visualizations that you probably have seen. And so if we wanted to change this, we can click on a different type of chart and it's going to visualize that data based off of that visual type. So that can be extremely, extremely useful. These are ones that I would use all the time, is just clicking on one of these and then filling in the x-axis, the value, the color, and all of these different things that it's prompting you to provide. Another thing you'll notice is we have different sheets up here. So within this analysis, we can add new sheets. So we'll make this interactive. And now we have a blank sheet here that we can build our visualizations off of. So let's say we wanted some type of donut chart in here. We have our donut chart and it's going to prompt us to fill in what it actually needs. So we need a value, then we need a group / color. So let's say we want the region to be our group and color. And for the value, we'll do the weighted revenue right here. And we're going to do the sum, and that should work. And so now you can see that this is interactive. You can go ahead and click on this. You can click into these different options. You can change these colors. Let's say we want to make this one black. There we go. And there's other options up here, like format this visualization, or if we want to maximize it or minimize it. And if we want to add any more visualizations, we just click add, and we can add it right over here. And so everything in here is quite customizable, and you can rename these sheets. Let's call this one sum by region. Call it whatever we want. This is just for this one visualization. But everything is in here is quite customizable. Now, once we have our visualizations, we have this properties right over here, and we can change a lot of the titles, subtitles. If it's a donut chart, we can make it large, small, medium. We can show the total versus not showing the total. So everything in here is very, very customizable. And we can specify if we want the data labels and the legend on. So if we don't want the legend, we can turn it off and on. Or if we don't want the data labels, we can turn those off and on as well. We also have over here an interactions tab. So if you want to customize some of these interactions, or if you want to customize some of these tooltips, you can also do that as well, which happens when you hover over it. So right here on this right-hand side, it's giving us the field for region and the weighted. And then you'll notice when we hover over it, you can see it's the US with the weighted revenue. So we can specify what we want in here. Maybe we want to add something else. Maybe we want to add, the date doesn't make sense for here, but maybe the segment. Let's go ahead and do that. And we hover over it. You can see there's a count of the segment, which is 12,824 for this data set. So you can customize these tooltips as well. Now, when we're done with our visualizations, we can come over here to File, and we can publish this and save as analysis. So just saving is going to save it for you to pick up later and do whatever you want with it. But let's say we want to publish this. Publishing this dashboard, and we're just going to call this sample dashboard, is going to make it available to everyone. So let's go ahead and publish this dashboard. So now we have this first sheet that was created by them, but then we have the second one that was created by us. Now, once we've published it, we can then come over here and we can share this. So we can share this dashboard, and we can come in here and we can choose anyone who has access to Quicksight. We can say, I want to share this with my colleague or the customer, whoever it is, and I want to use this. The other thing that we can do is we can copy this embed code. What you can do is you can say, hey, I want to embed this on my website or on this platform, and I want to show this visualization. You can embed that using the code from this right here. We also can copy this link. And so we'll copy the link. We'll come right over here. And now we have access to this dashboard. So anybody who has access to it can just use it as a link. And that's really helpful as well. But what I thought was really interesting within all this is the embedding code, because not every BI tool is embeddable. But Quicksight, because of course it's with AWS, it's all internet based. It's not, local to your computer. It's very embeddable into almost, anything you want to put it into. So let's go back to our sample dashboard. We'll go back to Quicksight. So that's our different analysis, but let's go over to our dashboards. When we actually published our analysis, it went right in here to our dashboard. So now this is a completed dashboard we would again share with our internal teams or our customers. We also can create data stories. This is something you do need to upgrade in order to receive access to this, but this is very, very similar to data stories in something like Tableau. If you've watched my Tableau series, it's very, very similar. You can watch this video as well, but you create these little stories. You can add narrative and why the data is doing what it's doing and what impact that has. And it's pretty good. I personally don't use data stories all that much. I mostly would create a lot of KPI metric dashboards and stuff like that. But there are use cases for data stories, of course. Lastly, we have these folders. Let's go ahead and create a new folder. Let's call this one Alex, the Analyst folder. Once that folder is created, we can come back to our dashboard. We can right click on this and say add to folder. Then we need to specify our folder. So we'll go to my folders and we'll add this. And so now within my folder, if I click in here, I have this dashboard. Now this is really just an organizational tool for the most part, but when you start using this in a production environment, you're gonna have a ton of different dashboards. And so you can come in here and create different ones for different customers, different clients, internal teams, so that you can organize all these different dashboards and data stories and whatnot. So you have it all in one place. And so again, that's just super useful, really user-friendly. Now, this is really all we're gonna cover in this video. We're not doing a full project in Quicksight. I'm really just demonstrating how to use it, some of the things that they have in here that I think are really interesting, and how you can publish and share and do all those things within Quicksight. So I hope that that was helpful. And if you have not already, be sure to check out my full Azure and AWS course on analystbuilder.com. And if you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe below. And I will see you in the next video.